A couple of weeks ago, I started a three-part series called Three Questions for Better Decisions. And that first week, we looked at the kind of decisions that we make. Sometimes we make a bad relationship decision or a bad financial decision, some bad choices that some of us have made. And occasionally, we are faced with unexpected decisions to be made. Maybe it's a medical decision that has to be made. Perhaps it's a relationship decision because we're confronted with a challenge in that relationship and we're having to make a decision we didn't see coming. But whatever the decisions are, we understand that decisions are not made in an emotional, neutral environment. They're made with emotion. And we talked then, even experts say that really emotions are what facilitate us to be able to make many decisions. The big question we asked that first week, I mentioned, was probably the most important question of the three that we're asking, is, am I being honest with myself, really? Tough question. Well, today, we're going to discuss the story of your life. It sounds like a bold claim and a broad reach, and in some ways it is, but I think you'll see it as we narrow down that it's not quite as broad as you might think it is. Because every decision you make becomes a permanent part of your story. So the second question is, what story do I want to tell? Every decision we make, every choice we make has an outcome. You know, some people have been caught doing something unethical at work, and the choice they made and the decision they made resulted in a lost job and maybe repercussions downstream. Perhaps it's a relationship choice that was made that either to go a direction in a friendship or a relationship that's not helpful, and over time that begins to deteriorate and take its toll. Or maybe it's a positive decision that had an outcome. Maybe you were in college and you were studying and everybody came and said, let's go party and have a good night out. And you said, no, I'm going to stay here and study. And because of that, you aced the exam the next day and you were able to have the academic credentials to get the job you were hoping to get. So whatever it is, we know that decisions have outcomes that affect our story, because decision by decision, you're writing the story of your life. So what story do you want to tell? Chances are you've never thought about it this way, about decision making, that it's a story that you're building. You know, I know people that have lost jobs and gotten depressed and chose to pick up the bottle and start drinking more and drinking too much, and financial choices were made and the spiral goes downward. Or we talked about relationship possibilities that continue to go south, or different things that happen. And they can be positive as well, as I just mentioned. The question is, at the end of the day, will you want to tell your whole story? Well, that's a tough question. Now, up till today, the story's been written. So the question is, what happens from today going forward? About 18 months ago, Lainey gave me a gift from a company called Storyworth. And the gift was that each week I would receive a question via email about my life. And I would write that response to that question. And after accumulating a number of those, it would be put in a book and be able to be available for my family. Well, if you know me, you don't ever expect me to do the same thing once a week, every week for a year or anything like that. It's just not going to happen. But I have crammed a few times and gotten 2 to 3 dozen stories written. But as I looked at that and was faced with some of the questions, some of them were light, some of them, what was your first job and that kind of thing. But some were, what was the most difficult decision you made? Or how has your faith changed over time? And so I found myself, am I going to tell the whole story? Because there's some things were tough to tell. And the truth is, I didn't tell everything. There's some things that I just couldn't put down in writing. But there were some that I celebrated, some that felt great. So the challenge is, we all have a story to tell. But moving forward, can we do it in a way that are things that we can tell and be transparent about? As we look at decisions and those points when we're at crossroads in our lives, we need to stop in the middle of the decision process and ask, which of the available options do I want as part of my story? Now, chances are you never thought about it this way. You never really, got stuck in the middle of an emotional moment and you never thought about you're writing a story. In those emotional moments, there's pressure. Maybe it was in your career at one time and you felt a lot of pressure to meet a quota, some kind of commitment that you were making, and the pressure was on. Or maybe the pressure was when he asked you to marry him, or you asked her to marry. And the pressure was focused there, and what are we going to do? What are you going to do? The challenge with being under pressure in emotional circumstances is that we tend to focus on the immediate and not the ultimate. Isn't it true that some of our worst decisions happened in the context of strong emotional appeal? It was very intense emotional appeal and why we chose that thing or that opportunity or made that decision. That's the reason we have some regrets, because the emotional appeal kind of drew us in and directed our decision making. They say that retail salespeople are very aware of that emotional attachment. Now, I've never done retail sales because I can't even close a door, let alone a sale. Now, I enjoy talking to people and interacting, but I just don't like asking that question. But retail salespeople are taught, don't let the person leave the store. If they're looking at something, do anything you can to keep them in the store, because the minute they walk out the door, the emotional attachment to whatever they were looking at dissipates almost instantly. Experts, in fact, say that once our appetites are engaged, we fall victim to a bias called focalism. This is what it means. The tendency to place too much focus or emphasis on a single factor or piece of information when making decisions. Take that in for just a second. I don't know if you've ever done it, but I have. I've even been challenged about decisions at times, but I would hold on to that one thing that I could hang my flag on about, this is why I'm making this decision. When we focus in and nothing else matters, think about when you first fell in love. You couldn't think of anything else but her or him. Everything else was blurred by comparison. Or in a less significant way, when you finally were able to buy that car that you'd always wanted, and the minute you made that choice, you saw them everywhere on the street. Well, emotionally charged environments make it difficult, because what we're doing in those emotionally charged environments, we're thinking about and focusing on the choice, not our story. The strong emotional appeal is, when we find it in our lives, when we are facing it, it really should be a red light, not a green light. Our story going forward is in future tense. We're all making a story as we go. The question is, what story do you want to tell? I have a former colleague named Jason Carell who was in the healthcare company with me. And he called me this spring and was telling me about a struggle he was having with his job because he was under tremendous pressure. He had a senior position at this company, and he was pressured around sales and directing the sales teams under him. And he was pressured by the CEO about new developments and all kinds of product developments and so forth. He was working close to 7 days a week just to kind of catch up. And it was also a circumstance where the company was new enough that they didn't have the supporting products and the supporting infrastructure to really give him what he needed as tools. And so he was drowning with his company, but it was also a huge opportunity. They had lured him to the company with extreme possibilities of great turnaround and return on investment because they gave him a lot of stock. And in fact, the company's planning to go public this next year. But he called me and he said, I'm struggling. He said, I'm not seeing my kids. I'm not seeing my wife. I'm irritable. I'm frustrated. I'm angry at times because I'm just stretched so thin. He said, I've got to make a choice. Now, what Jason was doing at that time was he was pausing in the middle and saying, what do I want my story to be? Well, he left that company and took a couple of months off because he was able to financially. And then shortly thereafter, some friends that he had known for a long time and completely trusted invited him in to join their company with a much better work-life balance. He was concerned about what his story was going to be not just immediately succeeding in the moment. Well, he's not the first to do that. And we're not the first. If we've done that, we've considered our story. We're not the first either. There's a story in the Old Testament. It's about 1850 BC. There's a teenager named Joseph. Now, you may be familiar with the story of Joseph. He was one of 12 sons, and his father Jacob liked him the most. The reason was Joseph was the son of Jacob's favorite wife. Now, think about that for a minute. The others were sons of his lesser favorite wives. So the brothers were frustrated, they were jealous, and they conspired to actually kill Joseph. Now, we all had sibling rivalries, but that's kind of taking it over the top. So they conspire to kill him, and they take him out, and they think, I can't go that far. So they throw him in this pit, this well, and they leave him there, and they're talking and thinking about, what are we going to do? And they finally drag him out, and they think, we'll just get rid of him. We'll sell him into slavery. So from that day forward, Joseph's brothers have a secret for life. In fact, they tell the parents that Joseph was killed by animals. Joseph's brothers made a choice, one decision at a time, and you know that moment they weren't pausing to think of what does this mean to our story long term in our life journey, or even Joseph's. They were thinking about the frustration and how to solve their immediate issue. Well, Joseph was put on the auction block. So we have his brothers putting him on the auction block, and he's bought by this man named Potiphar. Now, Potiphar, fortunately to Joseph, was captain of the palace guard. And he brings Joseph in, and he starts giving him responsibilities, and Joseph continues to perform. He's very dedicated. He's a very talented and gifted person in managing the household. And Potiphar gives him more and more responsibility. This is how the writer tells it. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Think about the story. Joseph, a young teenager from far away from friends and family, sold into slavery, but serves his master dutifully and dedicated commitment to the point that he's taking on all of this responsibility. And Potiphar is handing all of this responsibility over to him. Now, that's a story to tell. It worked for a while until his story intersected someone else's story. A no-win situation. A life and death situation. Here's what happened. Let's start with this part. Now, Joseph was well built and handsome. You can see it coming, can't you? There's trouble on the horizon. It says that after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." Around 19-year-old teenage young man. Potiphar's wife, "Come to bed with me." Joseph, fortunately, pauses and has a red light there to evaluate what he's going to do. What's my story going to be? My brothers tried to kill me. They sold me into slavery. I was bought. I've been serving Potiphar. I could take this opportunity and respond and do what she's asked. I might sacrifice some things, but it might be a whole different adventure. I don't know. But he, in fact, did something that was surprising. He refused. He refused. I'm thinking in sort of paraphrasing in my mind about what he's thinking as he refuses and tells her he's refusing. That he's thinking about his story. All that I've done, all that I've been through, how I've been faithful and dedicated and committed. Do I want to throw it all away in this one moment? This one choice? Do I toss it all away? And he determined that he would not. He remained committed. And he looks at her and he says this, "With me in charge, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to me. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. Well, that was probably a slap in the face. That was crazy that he could respond that forcefully and direct to her. He maintains the commitment to Potiphar, dedication to his story in the long run, and resists the temptation. Then he asks this incredible question: how then could I do such a thing and sin against God? This is the verse, this is the statement that tells us he's thinking beyond that moment and that opportunity. He's thinking about his story. How can I do this in the context of the life I've built and all that I've done? How then can I take this choice? I could choose option 1, commitment to Potiphar. Option 2, succumbing to the seduction of his wife. Well, the narrative continues. And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Joseph chooses the story, life or death. Now, we're not surprised that this was very humiliating to Potiphar's wife. So humiliating that she accuses Joseph of trying to rape her. So we've got Joseph's story, brothers, Potiphar, Mrs. Potiphar, all of this going on. And we see that Potiphar had no choice but to punish Joseph. It was a public accusation. The Bible tells us that the Lord was with Joseph. I'm going to step aside from that story for just a second and think about this. When Joseph was being threatened by his brothers, it says the Lord was with Joseph. When he was thrown into the pit, the Lord was with Joseph. When he's sold into slavery and forced to do things for someone else, the Lord was with Joseph. Well, sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but apparently it was so. So Joseph is thrown into prison. His story wasn't over. He thought it might be the end of it, but his story wasn't over. He had things to do to write his story going forward. Your story's not over either. As I mentioned earlier, we start today writing it going forward. Eventually, not surprisingly, Joseph won over the warden. Now that's quite an achievement. The warden trusted him as well and let him take on responsibilities there even in the prison. Another 2 years goes by, so we got 4 years into this. A couple of the prisoners had become friends, and they came to Joseph and said, I've had this dream, and I need somebody to help interpret this dream. So Joseph interprets each of the gentlemen's dreams. We find out that one of them had been the cupbearer of Pharaoh, a high position. And he's restored to the cupbearer position of Pharaoh, just as Joseph predicted from the dream. Unfortunately, the other man was executed, just as Joseph predicted from the dream. 2 more years go by. And Pharaoh has a dream. Now, he brings in his magicians, his counselors, all the wise people that he listens to, and they can't help him. And he's frustrated, he's kind of lashing out verbally, and the cupbearer remembers this young man named Joseph. So he tells Pharaoh about Joseph, and Pharaoh says, bring him to me. Now keep in mind, Joseph's been in prison all these years, thinking this is where it's going to end up. Remember I said his story wasn't finished? He comes before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh tells him the dream, and Joseph tells him, this is what it means. There's going to be a big famine in 7 years, and you need to get prepared. Well, he listened to Joseph because he had respect for Joseph based on what the cupbearer had told him, and likely because of what Potiphar had told him. So he had commitment and respect to Joseph's interpretation. Because Joseph had nothing to be ashamed of his life. There was no outlier story that was going to undermine Pharaoh's confidence. And in the end, Pharaoh makes Joseph prime minister. And he puts plans into place to store up grain and put stockpiles away so that, yes, 7 years, the famine came. And the Egyptians were continually be fed in that midst. So Joseph's story, brothers, Potiphar, Mrs. Potiphar. I don't know if you look back at certain things that have happened in your life and you think, if I'd only paused and thought about that, I might have made a different decision. We all have our stories to tell. And maybe there are things you'll skip over like I have. We also know that our stories impact others. We're going to look at a film clip from a movie called The Emperor's Club. Kevin Kline stars in it, and he plays a prep school teacher who's very committed to students. And one of the students he encounters 25 years later. Now, there's a lot that goes on in between, but this encounter that we're going to show takes place 25 years after he had this young man as a student. And this young man is about to announce that he's running for senator. Everybody has a story, and our stories impact others as well. Let's take a look.
Everything all right?
Yes, I'm fine.
Yeah, you don't look so fine.
I'm all right. Thank you.
And hurry up and come join the celebration.
How long have you been hard of hearing, Sedgwick?
Very good, Mr. Honor. Very, very good, yeah. Well, I thought you might have known.
Who's the poor mercenary who is feeding you the answers?
Oh, just some graduate student gave him a couple $100 and a warm meal. Trust you keep this between us. As always. I trust you will.
Do you mean, am I going to go out there and expose you for a liar and a cheat? No. I'm a teacher, Sedgwick. I failed you as a teacher. But I will give you one last lecture, if I may. All of us, at some point, are forced to look at ourselves in the mirror and see who we really are. And when that day comes for you, Sedgwick, you will be confronted with a life lived without virtue, without principle. And for that, I pity you. End of lesson.
What can I say, Mr. Hundred? Who gives it? Honestly, who out there gives it? About your principles and your virtues. I mean, look at you. What do you have to show for yourself? I live in the real world, where people do what they need to do to get what they want. And if it's lying and it's cheating, then so be it. So I am going to go out there and I am going to win that election, Mr. Hundred, and you will see me everywhere. And I'll worry about my contribution later. Robert. Robert.
His son heard it all. A story of two different men writing different stories. And I don't think Sedgwick was even clued in that he's actually writing a story that he'll ultimately have to deal with. We know that we're writing our story one decision at a time. I just have one last question. What story do you want to tell?